Good morning. Good Wednesday morning. We're pecking. We're pecking at the equinox of the gods because for the last few days we've been sort of preparing the advent, if you will, of the high holy days of Thelema. The invocation of Horus, which took place on March 20th, 1904, and the events and Crowley's life leading up to that are sort of chronicled into sort of a scattered confusion of bouncing back and forth in Crowley's narrative of his life, but it's very interesting, and as you read it, you are struck with the fact that as fragmented and as confusing as it appears at first, it's about the only way Crowley could tell this story, and he uses excerpts from various diaries of his period, and but he's starting out just like I started out with My Life with the Spirits, which is sort of a biographical thing. It's certainly not on the par or significance of this, but in order for me to talk about my life with the spirits and my life in magic and stuff, it was necessary, at least I felt it was necessary, to describe my life up to that point and what it was that brought me to the point of studying magic and all of that, and what raw material I had to work with. And Crowley was doing the same thing here. So we're on chapter 5, which is very short, but it's pretty important, and we don't know how he ended up getting married yet, but anyway, here we are, and I have a digression planned also because it's such a short chapter. Anyway, chapter 5, and it's called The Results of Recession. The wisest of popes, on being shown some miracles, refused to be impressed, remarking that he did not believe in them, that he had seen too many. The result of the meditation practices and their results following those of magic was to give our student, and he's talking about himself here, he's still talking in the third person, like he's not himself until he's master of the temple. Or there's still division, there's still duality. He's not enlightened enough to call himself, to speak from his first person. Anyway, I digress. The result of the meditation practices and the results following those of magic was to give our student a conception of the universe which was purely mental. Everything was a phenomenon of the mind. He did not as yet see that this conception is self-destructive, but it made him skeptical and indifferent to whatever happened. You could not really be impressed by anything which you do not know to be nothing more than one of your own thoughts. Any occurrence can be interpreted as a thought or a relation between two thoughts. The practice in practice, this leads to profound indifferentism, miracles having become commonplace. But what would be the amazement of the priest who, placing the host upon his tongue, found his mouth full of bleeding flesh? At the period of this writing, it is evident that for what purpose our student was led to this state, it was not to the magician, not to the mystic, it was to the militant member of the Rationalist Press Association that the great revelation was to be made. It was necessary to prove to him that there was, in actual truth, a sanctuary, that there was, in sober earnest, a body of adepts. It mattered nothing whether these adepts are incarnated or disincarnated, human or divine. The only point at issue is that there should be conscious beings in possession of the deepest secrets of nature, pledged to the uplifting of humanity, filled with truth, wisdom, and understanding. It is practical to prove the existence of individuals whose knowledge and power, although not complete, for the nature of knowledge and power is such that they can never be complete, since the ideas themselves contain imperfections, are yet enormously greater than aught known to the rest of humanity. Now, here's once again a huge parenthetical in the midst of a rather straightforward sentence. So I'm going to run it past you again. This is how the simple sentence would be. It's practical to prove the existence of individuals whose knowledge and power, although not complete, are yet enormously greater than aught known to the rest of humanity. And the parenthetical was, they're not complete since ideas themselves contain imperfections. It was of such a body that our student had heard in the cloud upon the sanctuary. Admission to its adyta had been the guiding hope of his life. And adyta, A-D-Y-T-A, the inner sanctuary, or inner sanctum, like the builders of the adytum organization. The adytum is the builders of the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. Admission to his adyta had been the guiding hope of his life. His early attainments had tended rather to shake his belief in the existence of such an organization. He had not yet reckoned upon the events of his life. He had not yet divined the direction and set purpose in forming their apparent vagrant course. It might have been by chance that whatever had been it might have been by chance that whenever he had confronted with any difficulty, the right person had instantly come forward to solve it. Whether in the valleys of Switzerland, the mountains of Mexico, or the jungles of the East. How often can we say that about our own lives and our own career and our own unfoldment? That whenever he had been confronted with any difficulty, the right person had instantly come forward to solve it. At this period in his life, he would have scouted the idea as fantastic. He had yet to learn the story. He had yet to learn that the story of Balaam and his prophetic ass might literally be true. And that's an Old Testament story. Balaam was got on his ass, his donkey, to go do something that God didn't want him to do, and an angel appeared to block his way on his way to do this forbidden act. And the donkey turned aside. The angel popped up again. The donkey eventually talked. So he said he'd yet to learn that the story of Balaam and his prophetic ass might literally be true. For the great message that came to him came not through the mouth of any person with any pretensions to any knowledge of this or any other sort. Now you're going to have to forgive me here. Crowley's going to be talking about his wife, especially when he first married her. For the great message came to him, that came to him, came not through the mouth of any person with any pretensions to any knowledge of this or any other sort, but through an empty-headed woman of society. The plain facts of this revelation must be succinctly stated in a new chapter. And we'll pick up that new chapter. The phrase empty-headed, of course, sounds incredibly insulting. But I think Rose would be the first to admit that for the greater part of her young life, and she was a super young widow, but she came from a privileged family, and was just educated in lady things, and not scholastic things at all. Supposedly, or reportedly, she would carry a little ladylike text, book of some kind of a piece of literature. She'd carry it around with her to make it appear that she was reading. I always picture her holding the book upside down. But she'd be the first to admit that her interest in magic, philosophy, things like that, warranted sort of a vacuum of interest and knowledge in those areas. And where most things that were important to Crowley were concerned, besides the physical relationship, she didn't labor in her mind too much. So that's why it sounds disrespectful that he would call her an empty-headed woman of society. But I want to digress into this cloud upon the sanctuary, because if you're not familiar with this tiny little book, it's the thing that lit the fire under Crowley that would eventually lead to his adventure in the Golden Dawn, and eventually the creation of his own magical contact, his idea about the Great White Brotherhood, things like that. And it's called The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, and Weiser published it, an edition of it back in 2012. And I was asked to write the introduction to it. It's only a page or two. So I'm going to end up with this digression about that cloud upon the sanctuary, and in essence, the subject of the chapter I just read from the Equinox of the Gods. Arthur Edward Waite, Crowley had written Arthur Edward Waite for advice, and Arthur Edward Waite referred him to Cloud Upon the Sanctuary. So as much as he makes fun of Arthur Edward Waite for the rest of his life, Arthur Edward Waite lit that match. And here's a little quote from Arthur Edward Waite. "The cloud upon the sanctuary has, I believe, always remained in the memory of a few, and is destined still to survive, for it carries with it a message of very deep significance to all who would look beneath the body of religious doctrine for the one principle of life which energizes the whole organism." And this is my introduction. Even the most Pollyanna-ish among us, I made up a word, even the most Pollyanna-ish among us will not deny that there is much unpleasantness in the world around us. Wars, disease, hatred, and discord. There seems to be no limit to the crimes and atrocities of our kind is capable and willing to inflict on others of our kind. It's easy for us to disparage as evil the fundamental character of human nature, and ultimately resign ourselves to lives of quiet desperation, surviving day to day by means of our moment-to-moment success in choosing the lesser evils. It is easy to grow cynical and discouraged when pondering the state of affairs on planet Earth. The nightly newscasts lay out a dinner-time smorgasbord of military conflicts, famines, civil unrest, and economic ruin. It is cold comfort to observe that there has never been a season in all of recorded history that has been free of such suffering, injustice, and shameful displays of man's inhumanity to man. One can argue quite convincingly that civilization, indeed all human enterprise, has always been and forever shall be driven by the cruel and ignoble motives of greed, avarice of the human heart. It is also not too much of a jump in logic to assume that all this unpleasantness, which we are helpless to resist or vanquish, is the result of a master plan hatched by villains whose embrace of absolute evil has reached perverted spiritual dimensions. Are you listening, Q? Everywhere we turn, on the internet, in the newspapers, on television and radio, conspiracy theories and theorists assail us with plots and intrigues hatched by governments and industries and secret societies that run governments and industries, who allegedly use information as disinformation to confuse and befuddle us, making us pawns in some monstrous plan for world domination, space alien cuisine, or something transcendently naughty. Ironically, many of these conspiracy theories and theorists seem to have fallen victim of their own distrust of the obvious, and with the wagging finger of accusatory paranoia have singled out the very organizations and movements most vocally opposed to the evils they fear and despise. Such is danger of trying to out-disinform the disinformed. Thus, the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and the Illuminati, societies and movements that were founded on the most admirable ideals of freedom of thought and brotherhood of man, are now the, quote, agents of Satan, or the monolithic church, or the world bankers, or the Jews, or reptile space aliens. At the same time, unless we've allowed ourselves to be completely overwhelmed by the depressing conditions wrought by the world's evils, we are forced to acknowledge what appears to be evidence of evolving consciousness. In particular, the breathtaking advances in human thought, arts, and sciences, quantum leaps in consciousness that in a few short decades have elevated the conversation from arguments over how many days it took God to create the heaven and earth to whether or not a particle traveling faster than the speed of light moves backwards in time. The theosophic and magical movements of the late 19th century optimistically latched on to the idea that such a master plan does indeed exist, that it is good, that it is facilitated by enlightened beings who have transcendently good motives, and that humanity advances and evolves spiritually, at least partially, because of their secret efforts on our behalf. Such is the premise and the promise of the cloud upon the sanctuary. The inimitable occultist and writer Arthur Edward Waite, who suggested the text to a young and impressionable Aleister Crowley, offers a most thorough and erudite introduction to this edition of the classic work, and it is with particular pleasure I present it to you now. There you go. And that's what we'll do today. Tomorrow we're going to pick up on chapter 6, which is more background information on Crowley, leading up to our understanding of who he was and what was going on during the, I won't say it, miraculous, the significant events of April 1904. Anyway, that's it for today. Continue to be good to yourself, be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.